In this video, we're going to learn about the Pendulum monster. A Pendulum monster is a monster that is half spell card and half monster card. They have two effect boxes, one for when it is played in the Pendulum zone and becomes a spell card, and one for when it is a monster. The only time you'll ever use the effect of a Pendulum monster's spell effect is when it is active as a spell card in the Pendulum zone. Pendulum monsters that are currently treated as spell cards follow the same rules as continuous spell cards and field spell cards, which we'll discuss later on. Pendulum monsters also have numbers in the middle of the card that are called the Pendulum scale. Both numbers should always be the same. At least at the making of this video, there are no Pendulum monsters who have different scales on both sides of the card. If a Pendulum monster is on your field, whether it be in your main monster zone, your extra monster zone, or in one of the Pendulum zones, and it will be sent to the graveyard, it will be sent to the face-up extra deck instead, as a mechanic of the Pendulum monster. If a Pendulum monster will be sent to your graveyard from any place other than the field, such as from your hand, being discarded by a card effect, from your deck for a card effect, or by being detached from an Xyz monster as Xyz material, because Xyz materials are not considered being on the field, it will go to the graveyard as per normal. In the next video, we'll be learning about the Xyz summon. In order to perform a Pendulum summon, you must have two Pendulum scales, one in each your left Pendulum zone and your right Pendulum zone. You'll declare that you intend to perform a Pendulum summon, and you will declare how many monsters you would like to Pendulum summon at this time. And once you've done this, you'll be allowed to perform a Pendulum summon. If the Pendulum scales you have are scale 1 and scale 8, you can Pendulum summon, which is to special summon monsters from your hand or your face-up extra deck, whose levels or ranks are between the levels of those scales. So if our scales are 1 and 8, we can Pendulum summon any monster whose level is 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7 from our hand, or face up from our extra deck. This is why Pendulum monsters go to our extra deck face up, so that they can be Pendulum summoned later on in the duel, or later on in the turn. If our Pendulum scales are 3 and 5, we can only Pendulum summon monsters who are level 4 from our extra deck or from our hand. Most Pendulum decks play exclusively Pendulum monsters because they like to have their monsters wind up on their extra deck so they can reuse them later. It also increases their odds of having a Pendulum scale to use in the first place. If your monsters are not Pendulum monsters, you cannot create Pendulum scales. But you still can Pendulum summon monsters that are not Pendulum monsters from your hand. If your Pendulum scales are the same, such as 2 5 scales, you cannot Pendulum summon any monsters as there are no monsters whose levels are between 5 and 5. Monsters that are Pendulum summoned from your extra deck must be Pendulum summoned to the extra monster zone, or a zone that a link monster points to. Pendulum monsters that are activated in the Pendulum zone are treated as spell cards only when they are in these zones. When these monsters are destroyed, they are treated as having been a monster that was destroyed, and will be placed face up in the extra deck. So if a Pendulum monster has a monster effect that activates while it is destroyed, even if it is destroyed while it's in the Pendulum zone, it'll still be able to activate its Pendulum monster effect. If a Pendulum monster is sent to the graveyard as material for an extra deck monster, such as a Synchro, a Link, or a Fusion, it'll be sent to the extra deck face up instead. Xyz materials are different because they are not considered on the field. So if a Pendulum monster is used as an Xyz material, it will go to the graveyard after it is detached, or if the Xyz monster leaves the field. Every player can declare a Pendulum summon, but not every player plays Pendulum monsters in order to perform a Pendulum summon. You can only Pendulum summon once per turn. If you perform a Pendulum summon and the summon would be negated by a card such as Solemn Strike, all of the monsters will be sent to the graveyard because a monster whose summon is negated is not considered to have been on the field. You cannot make an additional Pendulum summon should your Pendulum summon be negated. Pendulum monsters cannot be activated as set spell and trap cards in your Pendulum zones. If you'd like to set a Pendulum monster, it must be set as a monster. This is why Anti-Spell Fragrance is often played against Pendulum decks, because it prevents them from activating their Pendulum spells in order to perform their deck's main gameplay actions, because they'll never be able to access a Pendulum scale if they cannot play spells face up. In our next video, we'll learn about the Xyz summon.